Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. One person has been dead, multiple injured in Russian strikes on Ukraine, officials report. While the US President Donald Trump has said he's open to a three-way summit with Russia and Ukraine after Monday's talks in Istanbul ended without a ceasefire deal, but resulted in a prisoner swap of over 1,000 fighters each and the return of 6,000 bodies of fallen soldiers. Gaza's health ministry has reported 51 deaths across the enclave in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the UN has called for an independent probe after over 31 Palestinians were killed and more than 100 injured at food aid sites run by the Israeli and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Trump rejected any uranium enrichment for Iran under a new nuclear deal, blaming former US President Joe Biden for inaction, while Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi defended its peaceful program in Cairo during talks with the IAEA chief. President Zelensky met with Norway's Prime Minister NATO's Rutte and Romania's new president to boost air defense and push for stronger sanctions on Russia. Meanwhile, Ukrainian strikes left over 700,000 people without power in Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. Former President Yoon Suk-yeol has cast his ballot alongside his wife in South Korea's snap presidential election. The vote comes after Yoon's impeachment over his failed attempt to declare martial law. Early voters were seen lining up across Seoul to elect the country's next leader. Trump's administration has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn a lower court ruling that blocked mass federal layoffs as part of his plan to downsize the government. The Ninth Circuit Court has also rejected Trump's appeal, calling his move an unprecedented overreach. The suspect has been detained and faces charges for throwing gasoline bombs at a pro-Israeli rally in Boulder, Colorado. Injuring a dozen people, authorities discovered 16 gasoline-filled Molotov cocktails nearby, along with a gas canister in his vehicle. He planned the attack for over a year and used Molotov cocktails because his immigration status blocked him from buying guns. M23 rebels have executed at least 21 civilians in Goma as part of brutal offensives since January. According to Humanitarian Rights Watch, the death toll may be higher, with reports of over 50 bodies found and a sharp rise in rape, torture, and abductions, despite Rwanda's denial of supporting the M23 rebels. Russia has submitted a harsh set of terms at the ceasefire talks with Ukraine in Turkey. Russia has demanded that Kyiv accept neutrality, limit its military, and permanently drop aspiration to join the NATO. The Russian memorandum also called for recognition of Russian control over Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, a ban on Western arms and intelligence aid, and a full lifting of sanctions. Ukraine has remained firm in its stance. Ukraine has stated that there would be no recognition of Russian land grabs, no limits on its military, and no peace deal without a full, unconditional ceasefire. Kyiv says it expects Moscow's response to its own peace proposal by the end of June. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed Russia's proposal for a 2 to 3 day partial ceasefire, saying that Moscow only wants a short pause in fighting. The talks, which lasted just over an hour, failed to produce a ceasefire agreement. However, both sides did commit to a large-scale prisoner swap, including at least 1,000 military personnel each, with an additional swap of 200 possible. They also agreed to exchange the bodies of 6,000 dead soldiers. The talks had come just a day after Ukraine launched Operation Spiderweb, an audacious drone offensive deep into Russian territory, which targeted multiple air bases and damaged up to 40 strategic Russian bombers. Zelensky said that Russia's goal is to continue the war and is now urging U.S. President Donald Trump to approve tougher sanctions to pressure Moscow into a full ceasefire. Let's listen in to what Zelensky had to say.
Тому для нас дуже важливо ще раз підкреслити, як на останній нашій розмові з президентом Трампом, що якщо в цей раз Стамбул буде щодо припинення вогню не рухатись вперед, то повинні бути сильні кроки від Штатів, передусім пакет санкцій.
Despite the impasse, the White House has said that Trump is open to meeting with both Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Turkey, if such a summit can help move talks forward. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has offered to host that meeting. Let's listen in to what the White House press secretary had to say.
Suggesting that it's high time that leaders, President Erdogan, President Trump, President Putin and President Zelensky meet in Istanbul. Is that something that President Trump would support and would be partaking?
Well, the president has said he's open to it if it comes to that, but he wants both of these leaders and both sides to sit down at the table together. And we saw them do that at the urging of President Trump today. But as for how the president feels about those talks and what took place there, I'll let him speak on that.
Meanwhile, Russia's lead negotiator Vladimir Medinsky confirmed he met with Ukraine's defense minister before the wider talks began. Moscow, he said, is focused on a long-term settlement, not a temporary halt in combat. Elsewhere, Russia's overnight attacks killed one person in Ukraine's northeast region of Kharkiv and injured several more in the northern city of Chernihiv. Meanwhile, Ukrainian attacks have triggered widespread power outages across territories in the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. Meanwhile, as the ceasefire talks were going on, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met key international partners at the NATO Eastern Flank Summit in Lithuania. Zelensky sat down with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, thanking the alliance for its steadfast support. In a social media post, he said that he briefed Rutte on recent agreements reached in Istanbul over prisoner exchanges with Russia and the return of Ukrainian children. He also met with Norwegian Prime Minister to discuss continued support for Ukraine, including strengthening air defense systems, boosting investment in Ukraine's defense industry, and increasing pressure on Russia through additional sanctions. Zelensky also held talks with Romania's newly elected president Nicusar Dan, congratulating him on his election's victory. The two leaders discussed diplomatic efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine, recent negotiations with Russia in Istanbul, and the need to toughen sanctions against Moscow to curb its military production. The Israeli military says its troops fired at individuals half a kilometer from a US-backed aid distribution site in Gaza, claiming they posted a threat while moving towards the forces. This comes as local officials say at least 15 people were killed near the site. Gaza's health ministry puts the toll higher, saying 24 people died early Tuesday. The incident is under investigation. Meanwhile, 3 Israeli soldiers were killed in intense clashes in northern Gaza, according to the Israeli military. Hamas fighters reportedly engaged troops in heavy gunfire in the area. In another development, 3 Palestinians have been reported killed and dozens more wounded near a US-backed aid distribution site in Gaza, according to local medics. The Israeli military acknowledged the incident, saying troops fired warning shots at individuals approaching their position from a kilometer from the site. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which operates the center, denies that any casualties occurred at or near the facility. This comes just a day after a separate incident near the same site reportedly left at least 31 Palestinians dead. Witnesses, including humanitarian groups, say Israeli forces opened fire as civilians gathered to collect aid. The Israeli military denies this, calling the reports false and blames Hamas for spreading misinformation. The GHF also described the claims as fabricated. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate and independent investigation into the deaths, stating he is appalled by the reports. Israel's foreign ministry sharply criticized Guterres for not condemning Hamas. Meanwhile, ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas remain stalled. A Palestinian official involved in the negotiations says Hamas continues to engage with Egyptian and Qatari mediators. Israel says it remains open to a temporary truce to secure a release of hostages, but insists the war will continue until Hamas is removed entirely from Gaza. Israel has intercepted a missile fired from Yemen on Monday, according to the Israeli army. Sirens sounded across multiple areas, including Jerusalem, as the missile was shot down mid-air. Houthi rebels claimed responsibility, saying they targeted Ben Gurion International Airport near Tel Aviv. Loud explosions were heard overhead, but no damage or injuries were reported. This marks the latest in a series of long-range attacks launched by the Iran-backed group since the Gaza war began. Here's what the Houthi military spokesperson had to say.
القوات الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية استهدفت مطار اللد في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي نوع ذي الفقار، وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله، وأجبرت 4 ملايين صهيوني على الهروب إلى الملاجئ ووقف حركة الملاحة في المطار.
Israel responded with a powerful strike on Sana'a International Airport in Yemen, destroying the last civilian plane meant for Hajj pilgrims. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu blamed Iran for backing the Houthis, calling them a symptom of a larger threat. Tensions continue to escalate between Israel and the Houthis, with no sign of de-escalation despite past ceasefires. Now we move on to North America. In a major development in the Colorado attack, a federal prosecutor says the suspect accused of hurling Molotov cocktails at a crowd gathered in support of Israeli hostages in Gaza is now facing charges of attempted murder and a hate crime. Let's hear from the acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Colorado.
My office has charged Mohammed Sabri Solomon, age 45, with the commission of a hate crime. Mr. Solomon stated that he had been planning this attack for a year, and he acted because he hated what he called the Zionist group. And when he was interviewed about the attack, he said he wanted them all to die. He had no regrets, and he would go back and do it again. He said that he had previously tried to purchase a firearm, but resorted to the Molotov cocktails when he could not purchase a gun because he was not a legal citizen.
Boulder County District Attorney Michael Dougherty has also weighed in on the incident. Let's listen to what he had to say.
As you heard from the U.S. Attorney, the U.S. Attorney's Office will be prosecuting the hate crime against the defendant. Our office will be prosecuting the attempted murder charges and related charges at the state level.
And President Donald Trump has condemned the attack, calling it a terrible tragedy. In a post on his Truth Social, Trump blamed the incident on immigration policies under former President Joe Biden. Now we move on to Middle East. U.S. President Donald Trump insists that any Iran deal would not allow any uranium enrichment on his Truth Social account. Trump rejected reports that the U.S. proposal permits limited enrichment. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran will soon respond to the U.S. offer. The proposal, mediated by Oman, seeks to limit Iran's nuclear activity while allowing low-level enrichment for civilian use. Here's what the Iranian foreign minister had to say.
پاسخ خودمون رو و پاسخ مناسب رو به زودی خواهیم داد. پاسخی که مبتنی بر اصول جمهوری اسلامی ایران، منافع ملی مردم ایران و حقوق مردم ایران هست و مسلماً هیچ توافقی وجود نخواهد داشت مگر اینکه به غنیسازی در ایران و ادامه غنیسازی احترام گذاشته بشه و غنیسازی ادامه پیدا بکنه.
An Iranian diplomat has also told reporters that Iran is poised to reject the deal, calling it a non-starter that does not protect Iran's interests. According to the Axios, the US plan would allow Iran to enrich uranium up to 3%, enough for nuclear reactors but not bombs. Trump's administration calls the offer acceptable, but Iran demands full sanctions relief and continues to reject any restrictions on enrichment. Negotiations remain tense as both sides hold firm positions on this long-standing nuclear dispute. Now we move on to North America. The Trump administration is racing against time, calling on trading partners to deliver their best deal as it pushes to conclude a wave of trade negotiations in just 5 weeks. A draft letter from the U.S. Trade Representative's office reveals Washington's intent to fast-track discussions launched on April 9th, when President Trump temporarily halted his controversial Liberation Day tariffs following a sharp market backlash. That 90-day pause expires on July 8th. Meanwhile, talks between India and the United States could soon deliver a breakthrough. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says both sides have found common ground, and a final round of in-person negotiations is slated for this week in New Delhi. Let's take a listen to his remarks.
And we've managed, I think, to be in a very, very good place, and you should expect a deal between the United States and India in the not-too-distant future, because I think we found a place that really works for both countries. We would like market access. We would like our businesses to have reasonable access to the markets. Now, in exchange for that, what India is going to want is they're going to want certain key markets that they're going to want to make sure that they have special access to the American marketplace. And so that's the...
In Europe, Britain's Trade Minister Jonathan Reynolds is set to meet U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer as both nations struggle to finalize a deal complicated by fresh U.S. tariffs on steel. And legal challenges continue to shadow the Trump administration's tariff strategy. The White House is now asking an appeals court to put a temporary hold on a second ruling that claims President Trump overstepped his powers by imposing widespread tariffs. Officials argue that the verdict could undermine sensitive trade talks still in progress. Harvard University asked a federal judge to issue a summary judgment ruling to unfreeze $2.5 billion in funding blocked by President Donald Trump's administration, which Harvard said was illegal. In a filing submitted to the U.S. District Court in Boston, Harvard said it had received 957 separate orders since mid-April, halting funding for critical research projects. These include $88 million for pediatric HIV, $12 million aimed at identifying emerging biological threats for the Defense Department, and millions more to study cancer, Parkinson's disease, and dark energy. The freeze came after Harvard refused to comply with the list of demands issued by the White House. President Trump has accused the university and other elite institutions of being controlled by leftist ideologies and becoming centers of anti-Semitism. Harvard sued the Trump administration in April, alleging the funding freeze violated the school's right to free speech and was arbitrary. The Trump administration has also launched multiple investigations into Harvard, including probes into alleged threats against Jewish students and faculty, after pro-Palestinian protests as well as the university's ties to foreign governments. Last month, the administration revoked Harvard's ability to enroll international students, a decision now temporarily blocked in a separate lawsuit. A federal judge has scheduled arguments on Harvard's motion for summary judgment for July 21st. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud. The two discussed talks on Ukraine and Russia, efforts to stabilize Syria, and the ongoing situation in Gaza. Rubio also thanked the foreign minister for Saudi hospitality during the president's recent visit. Riyadh has not issued any immediate comment. Now we move on to Asia. South Koreans have started voting in a crucial presidential election, exactly 6 months after former leader Yoon Suk-yeol sparked political turmoil by declaring martial law. In the most recent developments, former President Yoon Suk-yeol and his wife Kim Kyon-hee voted at a school close to their home in Seoul. Early morning voters, including elderly residents in Seoul's Munrae-dong, were among the first to cast their ballots. Millions have already voted early, with over a third of registered voters participating in advance ballots last week, according to the National Election Commission. All polls show Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung leading by a significant margin. The latest Gallup survey places him at 49% favorability, while conservative Kim Moon-soo trails with 35%. Voters are focused on the aftermath of the martial law declaration, which left South Korea without effective leadership during the early months of U.S. President Donald Trump's second term. Political experts say this election is seen as a referendum on the previous administration. The martial law declaration and Yoon's impeachment have divided the conservative base and swayed moderate voters. Yoon's impeachment following his military deployment to parliament makes him the second conservative president in a row to be removed from office, after Park Geun-hye in 2017. Let's hear what voters have to say.
좀 생각해주는 그 대통령이 됐으면 좋겠어요. 우리나라
12월 3일 쿠데타도 청산을 해야 될 것 같고, 그래서 이제 정권을 바꿔가지고 또 한번 새로운 나라가 되도록 해보려고 나왔습니다.
Now we stay in Asia. Mongolia's Prime Minister Lü Sanam Srain Oyun Erdene has resigned after losing a parliamentary confidence vote. He secured only 44 votes, well below the required 64 in the 126-seat chamber. His exit follows weeks of anti-government protests over corruption and inequality. Demonstrations in Ulaanbaatar, led by young citizens, demanded his resignation. Reports of excessive spending by his son intensified public anger. Oyun Erdene claimed he fought corruption but admitted focusing too much on big projects. He warned the vote could trigger political instability. He will stay on in a caretaker role until a new prime minister is appointed within 30 days. The resignation marks a major political shift in Mongolia amid growing calls for reform and government accountability. Now we move on to Africa. Rwanda-backed M23 rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo executed at least 21 civilians over 2 days in February in the eastern city of Goma, according to a report published by Human Rights Watch. The report covers incidents on February 22 and 23rd in a Goma neighborhood, including the shooting of 6 men and 1 woman near a military camp. A 15-year-old boy was also taken from his home and later found dead at a construction site. The group also rounded up around 20 young men at a sports field on February 23rd. accusing them of being members of the army. 3 who tried to flee were shot. A leader of the M23 said the group would look into the allegation and publish findings. Human Rights Watch said the overall death toll is likely higher, with medical workers reporting over 50 bodies collected from the area over the 2 days. Guatemala's Attorney General office issued arrest warrants for Colombia's Attorney General Luz Adriana Camargo and former UN prosecutor Ivan Velasquez on corruption charges. They are accused of leading a criminal structure linked to the Brazilian firm Odebrecht. Velasquez called the warrants political persecution. Guatemala requested Interpol alerts for Camargo, Velasquez, and former Guatemalan prosecutors. Colombia's foreign ministry condemned the warrants, calling them legally unfounded and an attack on international justice. Velasquez, former defense minister and current Vatican ambassador, is known for his role in exposing corruption in Guatemala. Odebrecht, involved in widespread Latin American corruption, pleaded guilty to bribery in the U.S. in 2016. Now we move back to Africa. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy called Sudan the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. He warned that the country is in deep crisis after more than 2 years of war. The conflict between Sudan's regular army and the rapid support forces has killed tens of thousands and displaced 13 million people. That's almost a quarter of the country's population. Infrastructure has been severely damaged, and famine has struck several regions. Lammy criticized the lack of global attention to the crisis, saying the Western world has been ambivalent and indifferent. He promised to use his position to raise awareness and urge the international community to act. His remarks came during an event in Morocco hosted by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation.
The crisis in Sudan and that flows from Sudan is the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world currently, and it is a matter of deep, deep concern that there has been an ambivalence, equivocation, and certainly an absence of exposure to this crisis globally and across much of the Western world.
Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.